The reason why 95% of AI products and projects fail is because people have the wrong expectations about how successful they're going to be, when it's going to be delivered by. And so if you want to build effective products, you should pay special attention to how you manage expectations. And I think that if you focus on these 4 areas, you can move from the 95% of products and projects that fail to the 5% that succeed. All right. I actually have good news, which is that I am moving to Cologne, and I hear that the weather there is better, so my rainy streak will hopefully end. But I'm not here to talk about the weather. I'm here to talk about AI product management and how there are some key differences to traditional product management and how to build effective products with AI and machine learning. And I want to start us with 2 data points and 1 story. And the first data point is, I'm sure most of us have heard of Lenny's newsletter and podcast. So I looked at the last 20 that he's written. So he typically writes about product management and tech companies. And so I looked at the last 20 that he posted. And of those 20, 6 of them were not about AI, right? So 14 of them were about AI. So AI is very hot. Out of those 14, 5 of them were about how do you get your companies to use AI to be more effective. 4 of them were about how do you set up something called AI evals, which basically measures the effectiveness of your AI products. 2 of them were about AI SEO, how do you get ChatGPT to recommend your product. 1 about how do you manage people with AI, obviously. And 2 were actually about product management with AI. So how do you embrace chaos, and how does the development lifecycle of products change when you work on AI products? So there's a lot of materials to learn about how you can use AI tools and set up AI evals, but is that actually what's going to make your AI products effective? And so the second data point I want to share, and it's quite infamous at this point, is this data point that 95% of AI projects, according to an MIT study, fail to return a profit, right? So a lot of things are tried, but only 5% of them actually succeed. So the question to Lenny is that because these companies aren't using AI tools in the right way? Well, no, actually, the study explicitly says that the companies use AI tools. That's not the problem. Is it AI evals? Maybe not as well. So my central thesis today, and if you drop out now, this is the thing I want you to remember, is the key to making effective AI products is expectation management. AI product management is an exercise in expectation management. And to elaborate on this, I want to share a story from when I was first a product manager at Yelp. And so I worked on the applied machine learning team as their product manager. Effectively, we were these kind of AI or machine learning consultants. We had a bunch of different teams around the company, and we'd go in, talk to different teams, look at their problems, work together to figure out, hey, maybe we should do some machine learning here. Maybe we can improve the product. And so we had 1 product that we worked with that was for high-value ad targeting. So Yelp makes its money through advertising. And one of the kind of really key segments there is, for example, lawyers. Some types of ads are worth a lot of money. And when you're looking for a lawyer, that lawyer is probably willing to pay a lot of money for you to click on their ad and make an appointment with them. Movers is another good example of that, or car owners, for example. If you have a car, you're probably looking for car insurance. And so those advertisers are willing to pay a lot of money for that. And so they came to us and said, hey, we'd like to have this machine learning model that predicts whether this user owns a car, because then we can target them. And obviously, we were the applied machine learning team. So we came back to them and we said, no, we are not going to do that. Because building a machine learning model takes 3 to 6 months typically. So it's a really big investment. What we said instead is we're going to start with something super simple. We're going to start with something that I like to call an MVP model. It is the simplest thing that you can do that replicates what the model does, but you do it with, for example, a heuristic. So for example, what you could do is take users that have clicked on car insurance ads and just find similar users to them based on their search behavior. And we could actually put this together in a couple days. Within 2 weeks, we'd ran our first experiment. And what we realized is what we thought we needed was a very small audience that we had like a set of users that we'd identified with really high confidence own a car. But what we realized instead is that we actually needed a much larger audience. So we didn't have enough users identified to show the ads to. And we learned this within 2 weeks because we made an MVP model. But now imagine that if we had gone back and we'd say, yes, we are going to make this machine learning model. And then 3 to 6 months later, we ran the experiment and it just doesn't work. So by by setting expectations correctly about what we should do and what a good MVP in machine learning and AI products is, we could become part of the 5% of projects that succeeded. And this product actually drove millions in revenue. And so what I want to talk about today is 4 different things that you have to pay extra attention to around expectation management for AI and ML products. And so we talked about one of them, which is that your stakeholders are going to hear the word machine learning or hear the word AI and expect you to do really complex machine learning and AI, but that's not where you want to start. That's not the MVP you're going to start with. The other 3 I'm going to talk about are how do you manage expectations around success, timelines, and what does it mean to do innovation? So why should you listen to me? Sebastian already mentioned, I have been working on machine learning products for the last 10 years. I did a PhD in machine learning at the University of Cambridge. Then I worked at Yelp. I also worked at a startup called Aferis, which builds a federated machine learning infrastructure, and we'll talk more about that later. And then most recently, I've worked at Blinkist on personalization and GoOne on content discovery. I'm going to share some success stories and some really big failures from my times at these companies. So let's dive in and let's move on to talk about success. So when we build products, traditional product management, we build something, we ship it. Sometimes it works a little bit. Sometimes it works a lot. We're super happy. But even when it doesn't work, you usually have something to show for it, right? Like you have a feature that you build, or maybe the app now looks different. The tricky bit with AI and machine learning product management is that most of the time you try something and then you launch it and then it doesn't work. And in the end, you actually have nothing to show for it. And so that's really tricky. But when it does work, it could be worth millions in revenue. It could start a new business line. It could start a new product line, right? But that's really tricky, because imagine going to your CEO and saying, hey, the next 3 to 6 months, I'm going to work on this product, on this project. And most likely by the end of this, I'm going to have nothing to show for it. It's not a great recipe for job stability, right? And so one of the examples I'll give of a project that, for example, didn't work is I worked also at Yelp on a product called Yelp Store Visits, which is a store visit attribution product. Effectively, we're trying to help advertisers understand and estimate how many people actually went into their store based on their ads after interacting with an ad. And this is kind of like the holy grail of marketing, right? You don't want to know how many people saw your ads or clicked on it. You just want to know how much money did I make? Because if it cost me $2 to get someone in the store, and we know that they spent $20, that's obviously a really good return. And so we tried a bunch of different machine learning models, methodologies. How do you know whether someone visited a store? Which store was it to? And so one of the experiments, or like one of the methodologies we experimented with, was how do you know which of those stores the visit is to? And how do we assign credit to those stores? So for example, in this case, you might say, well, this user was probably in store 2. So I'm going to say this is a visit to store 2. But what you might also say is, actually, they're pretty close to store 1. The location data is not super reliable. Maybe I'm going to give part of the score to store 2 and part to store 1. Or maybe we're not even sure if it is a store visit, so maybe we only give partial scores there as well. That's the third option. And we believe, like, the machine learning engineers were super convinced. It's like, this is going to be amazing. It's going to improve the reliability of our reporting. It's the correct way to do the methodology. We're super excited for it. We spent like 3 months building it, and obviously it just did nothing. If anything, it made things worse. But we also worked on projects where 3 months later, we could estimate the impact of something we did, like a new machine learning model, and it would be worth like $1 million. And so that's kind of the thing we're dealing with, is like some things are going to work amazingly well, but a lot of things we do just don't work at all. So how do you deal with expectations? Because probably your CEO of your CPO is expecting you to regularly deliver things. And the framework that I find very helpful for this is called the 3 horizons. And the idea behind the 3 horizons is that there's going to be work and initiatives that you do that are meant to drive impact in the short term, horizon 1, some things in the medium term, horizon 2, and some things that are new products that are going to replace your horizon 1 products in the long term, horizon 3. And each of these things have different timelines in which they're meant to drive impact. They have different success rates. And so, for example, Horizon 1 might be things we expect to have impact this quarter, and we're pretty confident they're going to work. And Horizon 3, they're probably not going to work out for another year. But if they work, it's like the new product is worth millions in revenue. And so, it's now October. We've probably all just done our OKR planning. I'm still a fan of OKR planning. I'm sorry. But what I would invite you to do is to take your OKR plans, the initiatives, and the time that you're planning to spend on different things, and to map them against these 3 horizons. How much time are you spending on things in Horizon 1, 2, and 3? And in my experience, working on some non-ML AI products, this is a typical ratio for a team. So there's a lot of focus on driving impact in the short term, a little bit in the long term, but it's really difficult to say, oh, we're going to do things for the long term as well. And that makes sense because we're obviously always trying to increase revenue right now. Obviously, there's a lot of financial pressure. But in contrast, when I worked at Yelp on this applied machine learning team, the ratio we'd be aiming for is 30, 30, 40. So we always try to deliver some things with impact in the short term, but a lot of the time we actually spend on long shots, like the partial attribution, and some of them work, but some of them don't. Some AI teams might even have a ratio of 0, 50, 50, for example. And here's an example of real projects that we did against, Horizon 1 might be we built some new insights in our reporting dashboard. Pretty sure that's going to work. Whereas partial attribution, this is the example I gave earlier, it didn't end up working, but smoothing is another project we did, and it made us a ton of money. So the 3 horizons really help you set the expectations, right? Because by giving this overview to your CPO and your CEO, they'll look at these initiatives and they're like, okay, so we tried this partial smoothing. It was a Horizon 3 project, so it's okay that it failed. So all of a sudden, your conversations will be about risk and innovation. Now, let's move on to the third area where you have to pay special attention with AI and machine learning product management, and that's timelines. I'm going to share a story of me really, really messing up timelines. So I worked at a startup called Aferis. And Aferis builds federated machine learning infrastructure. And it's a very fancy way of saying that if you have data that's very sensitive across, for example, different hospitals, patient data, you can't just make a copy of that data and bring it into one place. So instead, we're going to make a machine learning model that we send to the data. It trains locally, and then we only send back the model updates. So none of the private data actually leaves the hospital, but we have a way to federate the training of our model. And we wanted to increase our sales pipeline, so we wanted this really nice demo platform where customers could try it out. And I was in charge of making the demo platform. And we didn't really have a timeline. It was just important that we get it done, right? And so I started working on it, and things turned out to be a bit harder than expected. And then there was some things got added on top. And I spent 2 weeks on it, 4 weeks on it, 2 months, and I did a really poor job of communicating what timeline and like some of the changes. And eventually, after 3 months, they just decided to shut it down. It just didn't work. So I did a really bad job of managing expectations around timelines. And we all know that doing timeline planning for normal products is already really difficult, right? The CEO or your customers want to know, when am I going to get this feature? It's already super difficult to estimate that. But now imagine that you also know that, firstly, you don't know how long things are going to take, because an exploration with machine learning or AI could take months. It could take couple days, and you don't even know if it's going to work in the first place. Most of these things are probably going to fail. So how do you deal with expectations, and how do you set yourself up for success? How do you not mess up like I did? And the solution is surprisingly simple. It's called it's also getting, yeah, there we go. It's called time boxing. And the idea is that we are willing to spend a certain amount of time on an initiative. So we say we're willing to spend 1 month exploring this idea. It could be a demo platform. It could be a new AI, a machine learning model, a new AI application. And we're going to set very clear guidelines of what we're trying to do, what are the success expectations, but then give the team a lot of responsibility and ownership within that box, right? So they can have their little party in their box, but at the end of that time box, we're going to have a conversation. And we're going to talk about what we achieved, whether it worked, and whether we continue or whether we pivot. And that's something that I should have done much earlier, is after 1 month, I should have had a check-in and said, okay, are we going to continue or are we going to pivot? And so this, for example, worked really well at Yelp when we worked on these different machine learning models, because we could, for example, make a list of 50 ideas on how to improve this model, and we just say, hey, let's spend 2 months on this, and at the end of the 2 months, we should ship a new model, but we could have spent 12 months on this, but we're going to time box it. And at the end of it, if it worked really well, we can decide to spend more time on it. And this also works really well for non-AI machine learning products. So for example, when I worked at Blinkist, we had a core part of the app that we were trying to refactor to rebuild it from scratch. And it was meant to be a 1 or 2 month project, and then it became 1 quarter and then 2 quarters. And at the end, in the 3rd quarter, we said, OK, we need to stop this. So we picked the time box and we said, OK, we have 1 or maybe 2 more months to finish this. The team can choose which things they still include, which features they cut out. But at the end of that, we're going to move on. And that actually really rallied the team, because time boxing works in a number of ways. Firstly, it creates a lot of ownership for the team. Secondly, it sets a challenge, right? Like, can you finish this in a month? And for your stakeholders, they now don't have to sit there, looking at their screen like, when is Thomas going to give us an update on what we're doing? They know that at the end of the time box, you have agreed that you're going to have an update and a conversation about what's next. So time boxing is a really, really effective tool, but it's surprisingly simple. And then the final area I want to talk about is innovation. Now, what does it mean to innovate? And I think we have a lot of CEOs and CPOs and other people asking us, like, oh, we should do more AI, right? We need to innovate in our product with AI. And I guess the question then becomes, is everything we do with AI and every AI or machine learning product, is it really innovative? And I would actually say that there's 3 different types of AI products. There's what I call hype or marketing, there's user problems, and then there's true innovation. And we'll talk more about what each of these are, but what I'll say at the start is that none of these are bad per se, right? Like, hype might sound like it's bad, but it actually has its place. The problem arises when you're having conversations and maybe your CEO is expecting you to build true innovation, but then the things you're talking about actually implementing are just hype, or they're just user problems. And those are really valuable too, but when the expectations misalign, then 3, 6 months down the line, you're going to have a really tough conversation, and maybe you won't have a job anymore. So let's talk about what each of these 3 mean. So hype is kind of what it sounds like. There's a certain hype wave, and we're just trying to ride the wave. And we're not doing it because we're really trying to solve a user problem in a really big way. We're not trying to drive these engagement metrics up. We're just trying to have something that we can show off to our customers, that we can use in marketing materials. Maybe we get better relationships with our strategic partners, because that can also be incredibly valuable. So the example I'll give is when I worked at GoOne. GoOne is the mother company of Blinkist. It's based in Australia, and they basically are a B2B edtech company. So they have a library of about 100,000 different courses that could be for how to do SQL, leadership training, compliance training, and they basically sell that library to different companies. And so as you can imagine, when you have 100,000 courses, your discovery experience, your search needs to be incredibly good. And so this was about 1.5 years ago. AI chatbots were super hot, right? So everyone was building AI chatbots. So we obviously spent some time building an AI chatbot. We also built some other things, like including it in a search experience. But in the end, we had this chatbot, and when we looked at the engagement of our chatbot and our success rate, it was significantly worse than our core search experience. From a user point of view, we should not build an AI chatbot. And I think we've all experienced this as well ourselves. But we could go to our strategic partners. We sold through a bunch of strategic partners. They did 10, 20 million in sales for us, and they struggled much more to build these AI chatbots. And we could go to them and say, hey, we've already built it. We can put it in your product if you like. And so all of a sudden, we had these really nice discussions and could revamp these conversations with them. And basically, they would drive more sales for us through that relationship. So was it worth it from a user point of view? Probably not. Was it worth it from a strategic and business point of view? 100% would do it again. The second one is user problems, AI products that focus on user problems. And so the temptation when we work on AI and ML is that we take our AI hammer and we start looking for problems, right? And we just look for nails everywhere that we can hit. But the key here is that we don't treat it as the one hammer, but we treat it as one thing in our toolbox. So we actually focus a lot on what is the problem that the user actually has. And we heard this in the previous talk as well, right? It's all about like what first principles, what is the problem people have? And then the AI and the machine learning can be just one of the tools that we use for that. And the example I'll give here is that when I worked on the personalization in the Blinkist app and the homepage, we basically wanted to make sure that when people came to the app, they could find something that they wanted to consume. And if they used the app today, they came back tomorrow, so habit building. And we ran a number of experiments. For example, we had a new recommendation algorithm. We had a new ranking algorithm on the homepage. We did push notifications, but we also just redesigned the homepage, for example. And so it's not about using AI. It's about solving a user problem, and AI is just one of the tools that you have. And now we get to the true innovation. And this is actually where we do take out our AI or an ML sledgehammer, and we start looking for buildings to destroy and new ones to build. And here we already mentioned this product on Yelp store visits, where before we build it, and this is really like the key here is not that we're trying to make something incrementally better, but we're trying to make things 10 times better. We're trying to create a new product line. And so with the Yelp Store Visits product, before we had this, we go to advertisers and we'd say, hey, you spend $100,000 with us, 1 million people saw your ad, 10,000 of them clicked on your ad, and then they're like, okay, yeah, but like, how much is that worth to us? We don't really know. And now we could go to them and say, okay, well, we actually think that 1,000 people walked into your store, or 100,000 people went into your store after interacting with the ads. And all of a sudden, you have these customers that are begging for these reports, and they don't want that cost per impression and cost per click anymore. They just want the cost per store visit. So that's what true innovation is about. And again, like, none of these things are right or wrong. They all have their place. And I actually would say that most AI and ML products are more in this bucket of user problems or in hype. It's just a problem when you talk to your senior stakeholders and they're only thinking about innovation and they're expecting you to build something that's going to 10x all your engagement, but then you're doing things like making AI chatbots that are probably not going to do that, right? And one final thought I'll share here is that I talked at the start about, we're going to talk about how normal product management and AI ML product management is different. There are actually some parallels here as well, right? So, for example, marketing and hype kind of sounds like a project, right? Like, you know what you need to build, you just need to deliver it in the right time frame. Whereas user problems are more just like normal product management, and innovation is kind of 0 to 1. But in this case, what you're trying to innovate is through AI and ML. So you're really going around and trying to figure out what are the problems that we can solve with AI and ML that we couldn't solve before. So wrapping up, the one takeaway from today: AI product management is an exercise in expectation management. In my view, the reason why 95% of AI products and projects fail is because people have the wrong expectations about how successful they're going to be, when it's going to be delivered by. Are we really innovating or building something else? And so if you want to build effective products, you should pay special attention to how you manage expectations. And those 4 areas to pay special attention to are: what does it mean to build an MVP? Right? When you say, oh, like, let's do a machine learning model, maybe you should not start with the machine learning model. Maybe you should start with an MVP model. When you talk about success, map out what you're working on against the 3 horizons. So everyone is aligned that some of the work you're doing is probably not going to work, and some of the work you're doing is most likely going to work. But it's different from traditional product teams. That ratio of those 3 horizons is different. When you're working with tricky timelines because you don't know how long things are going to take and whether it's going to work out, consider trying out time boxing. Give the team 1 month or 2 months to just explore, but at the end of it, you make a continue or pivot decision. And finally, think about whether you're really working on innovation. Because everyone's talking about, oh, we need to innovate and we need to use AI. But there's actually also a lot of value in just doing things for hype and for market awareness, for strategic partnerships. And there's value in doing things for innovation. But if your stakeholders are not aligned and expecting you to do one, but you're actually doing the other, then you're going to have a tough time. And I think that if you focus on these 4 areas, you can move from the 95% of products and projects that fail to the 5% that succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Oh, wow, that was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Especially, I mean, when you entered it and said like, okay, AI product management is mostly about expectation management, I was a bit like, all right, intrigued. So go on. So, do we have any questions for Thomas? I think we can take one question for him, and otherwise you can find him later on. I think he will be on site a little longer.
Yeah.
So, any questions for Thomas? Over there. Oh, are you okay? Good? Oh. That was a horrible throw, Dominic. Horrible.
You were very optimistic about how far you get.
Oh, yeah. I saw that. He was
the
just like,
other
I'm
side of
going to
the
go
room,
all
yeah.
the way. Yeah.
Maybe our like baseball players or something, right?
Yeah.
American football, I don't know. So thanks for that. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. And I'm gonna take a bit of a controversial stance and ask you, isn't AI product management just product management? Like what is really different there? I haven't really seen anything that is in fact different.
Yeah, I think it's more like certain areas are on steroids, right? So timeline management and like success expectation management, it's already hard for normal product management. And I think whenever, at least in my experience, whenever I've advocated for doing something in like a Horizon 3 thing in a normal product team, it gets a lot of blowback and it gets a lot of people like, no, we need to focus on the short term. But if you work on AI and ML, most of the work you do is supposed to be in that bucket. Otherwise, you're just working on a lot of hype things, which again, could be fine, but it could be a problem. So yeah, in a way, like normal product management is also just an exercise in expectation management. But there are certain ways that I think it's kind of on steroids, and you have to pay even more close attention. That if you use the same strategies that would work with normal product management, then you'd still fail if you worked on something with AI and ML.
Yeah, I think that puts it pretty well. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Perfect. So, give a, how do you say tosend in English? Like a roaring applause to Thomas. Thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you.